While connected technology is essential for unlocking new efficiencies on the production floor, it's also presented hackers with new opportunities to steal valuable IP and data. To support OT professionals in their battle with cyber criminals, we launched the Security Breach podcast. In each of our over 100 episodes, we've brought in cybersecurity specialists to provide valuable insights and break down critical topics. As a go-to podcast for our listeners, we want to help you align your brand with our expertise. By sponsoring our podcast, your brand will build trust, and your message will stand out to an audience searching for tools to assist their cybersecurity efforts. Secure your share in this rapidly growing segment by sponsoring Security Breach. Contact us today to learn more. Hi, I'm Jeff Reinke, Editorial Director of Manufacturing.net and Manufacturing Business Technology. Welcome to Security Breach. One of the goals of this show is to help you better understand all the threats facing your OT assets, your data, and your people. In order to do that, we work to identify individuals with a feel and in-depth understanding of these threats and the evolving network of threat actors. I can't think of anyone better to break down the hacker landscape than an individual whose research has led to being followed by, well-known data breachers on social media and considered, persona non grata in countries housing many of the most notorious state-sponsored hacking groups in the world. It's my pleasure to welcome Jeremiah Fowler back to Security Breach. You might remember that we originally spoke to him regarding a huge ERP data vulnerability last summer. Jeremiah, thanks so much for joining us today, and welcome to Security Breach. Jeremiah, thanks so much for coming back to Security Breach, man. Great to see you.
Yeah, you as well. Happy to be back. Always a pleasure.
So just to reorient our audience a little bit, I know last time you were on, you described your job as big boy treasure hunting with purpose. I understand you've got a little bit more of a formal role now, but maybe you can talk to the audience again about your background a little bit and what you're up to now.
Yeah, so I am a cybersecurity researcher. I'm the one that's looking for exposed data and trying to notify companies and organizations that may have a data breach. My big goal is privacy, consumer privacy, individual privacy, and data protection. So I've been doing that for around 11, almost 12 years. And recently I took a position with anti-siphon training. That's Black Hills InfoSec. And, the cool thing about that from my perspective is these are the actual practitioners, who have been in the trenches fighting. And another thing about education is instead of outsourcing that to a vendor, you keep that knowledge in-house where it can best be used for your internal networks or security systems.
No, very cool. And we were talking a little bit before we got started here about one of the more recent things that you've been working on. Talk to us about this IoT intrusion that you discovered here and some of the different elements to it. It's pretty incredible.
So I was looking through Elastic indices. So that's really good system for storing logs and large amounts of data. And I found a database that basically had almost 3 billion records. And I started looking through them. And normally what I do is I look for certain keywords like Gmail accounts, password, encryption keys, things like that. Well, this ended up being a Chinese agricultural light manufacturer, and they sell these lights all around the world. Their biggest target market is the marijuana industry,
Sure.
according to their social media. And I saw the IoT device connects to the Wi-Fi. And then your phone app, you can turn the lights on or off remotely. Now, what happens was that IoT device captured the Wi-Fi name, the password, the IP addresses, security keys, everything basically you need to start a botnet or do some really malicious stuff on those networks.
Yeah.
It really was a huge wake-up call, and I reported it to the company. The company just basically was like, "Oh no, we didn't know."
Yeah.
We make lights, not software,
Yeah.
but it's a wake-up call for even people in the industry that you cover. IoT devices are extremely dangerous because a lot of times they're not made to have like ongoing lifetime security updates, whatever firmware they're using, so they can really be a giant gaping hole into your network.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, no, that's interesting because last time we didn't talk a lot about secure by design or embedded security dynamics, but that's becoming a bigger and bigger issue because, like in this instance, they're a lighting manufacturer, not a software developer. Is this something that you're seeing the Black Hat community becoming more aware of and seeing this as a bigger and bigger target potentially?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, if you are a hacker or a nation state, which we're finding a lot now, most of them have either the blessing or directly are
Yeah.
employees of a rogue government. And you basically have your checklists of all the ways that you can access a network or breach a database. And, in a lot of companies that produce IoT devices or certain things like that, and you're talking everything from medical equipment to smart home features, their primary focus is product development, getting that out in the market. So any way that's a weak link for bad actors to get in, you can guarantee they're going to check it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's interesting because all the different data then that they can extract from this type of hack. I mean, you're talking about the wireless passwords, and that can obviously give IP addresses, physical locations, and that sort of starts the whole social engineering process. And we've seen hackers getting so good at this, whether it's going after information for login data or just to sort of create that profile. They can plug it into an AI platform and start spitting out a lot of really scary sort of phishing emails and things of that nature. What types of things are you seeing with a lot of these new social engineering practices? Because it feels like it's the same old stuff, but it's kind of brand new at the same time.
Yeah, and you touched on it a little bit there. The AI has really supercharged the fraud game. Where, a few years ago, if you got an email from your dead uncle in Nigeria's lawyer who's trying to, reach you to give you a few $1 million after you transfer them a few thousand, those days are gone. Now you have human readable text that can almost keep up with real-time communication. There's a case in Hong Kong last year where they did deep fake videos of some top C-level executives in the
Yeah.
company and got, the CFO to actually transfer a few $1 million, and they never caught them as far as I know. Um, Social engineering, I forget the exact number, but it's in the high 90s of, most cyber attacks or any sort of successful scam starts with social engineering or has some level of social engineering. I see a big risk in internal company data, and that would be things like invoice fraud. CEO fraud is actually a pretty big thing as well, because once you have all these data points, you can create a profile. And when you have that internal information, whether you're reaching out to internal employees or external customers, they now have data that only the company and the client would have. So if I said, hey, here's account number, blah, 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 you pay your bill on this day, we're having an issue with your credit card. Can you please validate the following information? And you would say, well, yeah, of course, why not? You know everything. You have no reason to not trust this individual. And the same goes with companies and invoices, because it is that trusted inside information. So just to finish that thought, never never provide any information unsolicited or from an account that is not an official email address or an official phone number. One of the things that the Russians like to do is they like to, take the domain name and buy something very similar with, one of the different alphabetic characters from their languages.
No, it's interesting. I mean, here we're looking at something where people got in through a software vulnerability and a light, and what it can lead to in terms of how they can worm through that organization potentially and the information that they can grab. S-bombs are a big topic right now. Everybody's kind of in, I don't know if they're spending too much energy on it, but it seems maybe a heightened priority that it takes the place of other things that should also be getting attention. But when it comes to these software bill of materials and identifying this, from your perspective, do you try to reach out to the software folks as well? Or is it primarily just the manufacturer and it's up to them to get to the software people? It seems like there's a real tug of war over responsibility between a lot of these internal players sometimes.
Yeah, a lot of times, if there's a third party contractor, the company in good faith says, hey, here's what we need. We need to develop this. We either need a CRM or we need a mobile app or something. And they reach out to the contractor without really putting in strict guidelines of liability. And so if the contractor has a data breach, it still reflects the company. Those are still your customers. That's still your data. And I've seen that a lot, especially in the medical industry, because these are medical people. They're not focused on software and technology, even though they're required to use it now. Um, so that's the big thing that my advice would be to companies who are outsourcing is really sit down with them and say, yes, okay, you can do the work, but tell me what you do uh, to secure that data, to protect that data. What are your mitigation practices if we do have a data breach? And then that way it's not, a nuclear bomb in the middle of your business.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and a lot of that last time we talked a lot about the human factor and the different elements that sometimes get overlooked in cybersecurity planning and training and things of that nature and getting at that individual level. You mentioned a lot of the effort that's being put into AI and developing phishing emails and spear phishing emails going after the execs. What is your take there in terms of maybe things you've seen that people are getting better at, or advice that you would offer too in really addressing that human element of cybersecurity, especially at some of these huge organizations where, boy, just one little slip up and people can worm their way through and get at a lot of important stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I see a lot of companies not trust anything, including my responsible disclosure notices that you've had a data breach,
Yeah,
where they just don't trust anything. And
yeah,
instead of actually Googling that I'm a real individual, I'm a member of the cybersecurity community, I'm an ethical researcher, they just go, nope, not today, spammer, scammer. And I've seen that. And when you have a data incident, every minute, every hour, it could mean the difference between a catastrophic breach where that information is downloaded or extracted and dumped onto the dark web, or acting fast, closing it down quickly. Um, I would say the biggest thing, uh, companies also do not have the internal culture to be able to kick something suspicious up the chain of command. And they'll either outsource all of their security or they'll have a little understaffed team that really doesn't have the resources to deal with all of this. And it's at the company's own peril that they do this. And I always call it the C-level ivory tower, because it's impossible to reach the right person only because they don't want to get, all of the sales contacts or marketing outreach. But in not having a communication channel for anything suspicious that's data protection related, cybersecurity related, that's a huge error, and every company should have that because, humans, we only have we have a very limited and narrow scope of what we can do. You can't look at generated email now and immediately go, this is a scam, because a lot of AI assistants are also being used by legitimate people. Um, so it's really going to be different in the coming years. And it'll probably happen fast if there is a way, to tag and flag AI generated content. Maybe there's something hidden in the metadata, and of course they'll figure out a way to strip that out pretty quickly as well. But that's the big thing is trust nothing, verify everything. That would be my advice to anyone during these Wild West days of AI.
Absolutely. One, it's interesting too. I wanted to circle back a little bit on the human element. One of the things we talked about before too is sort of that aim and blame policy a little bit. Figure out who clicked on the link and kind of focus on the bad behavior, if you will. What's your take there? I mean, is that important? Does that have to be there in an organization to have a level of accountability, or do we need to sort of disregard that and
Yeah.
just focus on the solution?
So in the past, I've actually consulted with a few companies and we did that
Yeah.
internally, sent some honeypot messages. And some of the companies were really, startup oriented, really cool. And the link we would just cloak and then redirect to like some shock website. Not going to mention what they were, but whenever you heard someone in the office scream, you knew that they clicked it.
Yeah.
And we made it fun. And when we made it fun, that changed everything because then it wasn't this name and shame, aspect because just humiliating someone and embarrassing them, it really doesn't change that internal culture of if you see something, say something, bring it to attention because a lot of people just don't want heat. So it's like,
Yeah.
no, it's all nothing. And that's the wrong approach as well because when you realize that every single person inside your team is a protector of data, then it changes everything. Everything from your HR person to anyone that has access to any sort of data. That's the person that should be able to, protect that data or at least feel responsible that they're part of a team that can do that.
Absolutely. So, digging into a little bit of the work that you've done currently and sort of in the past, when I introduced you for the episode, we talked about, without mentioning names, there's definitely some interest, some groups that you've gotten their attention, whether that's good or bad. There's maybe some countries that know your name for different reasons because of the research you've done. What are some of the things that you're seeing when it comes to some of these state-sponsored? They call themselves hacktivists. They're hackers. The cloak has been lifted a little bit there. We've seen recent stuff in Iran with the cyber avengers. We know there's a ton of stuff going on in Ukraine and Russia. What are some of the things you're seeing that are kind of on the global level right now?
We'll be back after a quick break.
If you spend way too much time online, first of all, same. And second, you need promo guide talk pills. I'm Rawal, and with Alex, we break down everything happening in tech, digital marketing, and the internet's latest chaos. No boring corporate talk, just real discussions with real opinions. So go on, press play. You know you want to.
I don't spend a lot of attention on that just because, one, I don't want to get on the radar. I don't, I want to be diplomatic and neutral. And I'll just recap. So when I lived in Ukraine for 11, 12 years, I left during the invasion, and Anonymous had announced that there was going to be a cyber war against Russia. And many major news outlets covered that, but no one had evidence or any proof. So I researched Russian databases to see what was actually going on. And out of 100 databases, 98 of them had basically been wiped out. File names changed to Putin
Wow.
Huilo, Putin stop this war, glory to Ukraine, Slava Ukraini. Um, and so I provided evidence and it got picked up, by every major news outlet. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. And a couple of the journalists tried to get me to say bad stuff about Anonymous. And I'm like, very capable group. Not, no, they've
Yeah.
fulfilled their claims.
Yeah.
And and then I see on Twitter, Anonymous has followed you. And I was only one of
Yeah.
about 200 people that Anonymous follows. And I was like, oh no, this is how it ends. So, but luckily I kind of close my peripheral vision to hacktivism because when we cheer the good work they're doing today, it could be your company, your bank, your country, or anything that falls into the targets down the road. So I stay pretty far away from that. But Anonymous is this organized, disorganized collective.
Hmm.
Anyone who has the calls can jump in, jump out anytime, where it's very different with the Russians and their disinformation campaign. I studied a little bit of it, but the thing is, Russia even had a bot network that was using ChatGPT, and they didn't make their payment. And you could ask Joe Patriot Montana, you could ask him how to make pancakes, and ChatGPT would kick back. And of course, the
Yeah.
programming said, I am an American patriot, I am pro-Russian, I am pro-presidential candidate, or
Yeah.
anything. And they had given these parameters, but you could break it and get it to tell you
Wow.
how to make pancakes or, other things. So Russia is doing this on a constant basis. And, misinformation and propaganda has been a staple, since the dark days of the Soviet Union. Nothing's
Yeah.
changed but the name. And unfortunately, they're just creating chaos. They're sowing chaos. I don't see them, North Korea just today had like the single largest cryptocurrency theft in
Yeah.
history.
I did see
So
that.
you
Yeah.
do have these nation states, and our sanctions mechanisms, they're just not strong enough to really stop these guys. But I don't know what it's going to take. But they definitely are a threat. Right now, they're focused on disinformation, money, and just chaos.
Yeah. Well, the disinformation is obviously alarming and important to take note of. But I think one of the things, too, that we're really sensitive to in the industrial sector is how they're using a lot of this technology or in their reach and their resources, especially to get into critical infrastructure. The cyber Avengers have done that a couple of different ways. We recently had an episode talking about how they were sort of foiled before they could really launch a lot of this malware that potentially could have really got into water treatment facilities and other sort of utilities and things of that nature. Once you get in there, you get into the ICS, then you're getting into manufacturing and production on a much larger level. So I think it's important that we're constantly talking about this because the takeaways are so important. So whether it's a disinformation campaign, whether we're talking about critical infrastructure, denial of service, whatever the case is, when we break these attacks down, what do you see as some of the most important things that we can extract from them and learn from them? I mean, with the research that you're doing, that's a lot of what we're hoping to do is to educate folks. What's some of the bigger takeaways that we're getting right now?
Well, I would say, they are after data. They're after information. They're after intellectual property. So knowing what they're after, a lot of this stuff should be encrypted. It shouldn't. I always say with medical records, and even, medical records stick with you forever. The same with intellectual property, and manufacturing is, it's critical industry in the aspect that we depend on it. Jobs depend on it. Um, Give data that is not in active use a lifespan. And what I mean by that is even if you have to take it offline, because our dear friends in China have a very long history of taking intellectual property, blueprints, ideas. There may or may not have been a Lockheed Martin plane that was copied a few years ago.
Yeah.
So we know what they're after, and knowing what they're after, don't leave that setting around. If something is not in active use, take it offline, store a physical backup of a backup of a backup, you know, 5 or 6 people that you trust, a safe in the office, a safe, uh, because when it's offline, it can't be hacked.
Yeah.
And I see so many people and companies not using encryption. And yes, it does create a huge hurdle for coding and development to be able to handle wherever that data is stored in a cloud repository or wherever, to decrypt it from there, deliver it to the end user, then re-encrypt it, and then send it back. It creates a huge burden, but that's what we're going to have to do, to really secure data.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we talked about this, and we talked about this a lot on this show in terms of segmentation strategies, but also implementing that sort of cyber physical element to your platforms or to your approaches. I mean, it's a surefire way to really protect a lot of this important IP and even personal data on some levels as well. So, absolutely makes sense.
Intrusion monitoring is also it's also really valuable, and I am just shocked at how many databases with incredibly sensitive data. And when I say that, I found a United Nations database a while back. I found Illinois voter databases with literally the voter ID cards, the social security number,
Wow.
CSV spreadsheets of how they voted, where they are, everything in between. So with intrusion monitoring, the I've been in databases that absolutely should have had it. Like within 5 minutes of someone in Germany or someone from outside of your region, outside of your internal network, only a very small number of times has a database actually went dark and blocked me out within the first hour.
Wow.
And that's, I would say, a clear indication to me that they're just not being used or not being used enough.
Yeah. Interesting. It kind of leads into a conversation about tools as well. I mean, one of the things that you mentioned last time was not putting all your eggs in one basket, so to speak, because there's a lot of different options out there. Is there something right now that you're seeing that maybe is underutilized that could be used more, whether it's penetration testing, bug bounties, I don't know, whatever the case may be? Is there something that's maybe underutilized right now that could help solve a lot of these problems?
Well, I'll start with the bug bounties because you hit a sensitive one there. So when I started doing security research, I literally made a living off of bug bounties.
Wow.
It's been probably a year and a half since anyone has offered me a bug bounty. Um, and I just found a very big hospital network, and I went to their report a bug or report a breach, and in very big letters it says, "We do not pay a bug bounty. We do not pay anything. Thank you for your day, and also sign our NDA when you report a feature." And that's a huge mistake because, not for me. I've got other stuff going on. I'm working with anti-siphon training.
Yeah.
Um, but to get some of the brightest and the best researchers interested in helping companies secure their own data, there has to be a value on that. And if you look at the cost of a breach, the loss of reputation, the loss of customers' trust, and then any regulatory penalties, if you compare that to just a bug bounty, that's a no-brainer. But companies are not doing it. And there still are, some of the third-party bug bounty, basically portals. And same thing, everything's out of scope. They're paying so little that you're just not going to get the best and the brightest in there looking for critical vulnerabilities and bugs. With penetration tests, it's absolutely a necessity. Now, another thing, if your budget permits, use multiple vendors because there is no standard. And what one vendor does is not the same as what another vendor will do. And so, where one may automate everything and then just give you this giant report of false positives to just say, "Hey, look, we're doing our job. We're earning our high fees." That is very important because at least the any good vendor is going to really dig in there, really try to find a bug, not just give you something. And firewall firewall protection is the most basic, and I see it all the time where the firewall's not up, outside access can come in. See it all the time, like way too much.
Yeah, I think people have put in, like you said, it's such a basic tool that people feel all the other advanced stuff they have is in place. It's not necessary. Maybe it's a budget item that's easy to cut. But yeah, kind of a head scratcher in terms of why you wouldn't just have that simplest thing in place.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes no sense.
You touched on this a little bit, but whenever we talk about data, and especially in the industrial sector, it takes me to the cloud because companies, I think, have become really dependent on the use of cloud networking and data storage, which makes a ton of sense. But I think there's sometimes a misunderstanding of where the security responsibilities lie. They feel like I'm working with whomever in the cloud, whether it's Amazon or Microsoft or whomever, they've got me secure. Not always appreciating that that runs both ways. What are some things that you've learned there in helping secure the cloud that maybe people are overlooking or should be paying more attention to?
Most of the cloud storage providers do have some sort of security, like suite of tools or settings. And many times, and I saw this a lot during COVID. And, we're getting out of the work from home mode, and a lot of people are coming back in the office. But when you have remote employees or contractors or vendors that need outside access, so many times I see human error where instead of opening access for one, they open access for all. And then either forget to close that access or not realize that it's open, and there's your data breach just waiting to be discovered. And keep in mind, me as an ethical researcher, I'm finding some pretty serious stuff. Now, imagine what a small army of state-sponsored hackers are doing and the amount of data that they're extracting. They're training AI on it, they're filtering it for value. Who knows all of the things that they're going to do with it in the future? And that's the real fear. If I'm just one guy with some computer skills and can find this, what are these guys finding? What are these state-sponsored individuals and hacker groups going to do with it?
So does this become just more better due diligence in terms of securing the cloud? Is it a lot of the basic stuff we're not doing right now? What are you seeing right now as maybe the missteps?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, I've heard a few like CTOs when I've reported something and they say, I don't understand. We had, everything set to local only. We had our firewall up and then we did an update and it reset the security settings. And so that's another huge thing to be aware of if you're doing patch management, or you're doing an update of your internal servers or your cloud. And they would never give me the exact specifics of what went wrong, because I'm not a member of their organization, I'm not under NDA, but I've heard that more than once that they did an update and it wiped out or reset whatever security settings they had on their cloud storage. So that would be my advice is to one, set up every possible add-on or basic features that, your Azure, your um, Google, your AWS, anything that they offer, take it. And there's a wealth of knowledge to learn how to use those things. There's private contractors or consultants that can come in and help you set that up and say, okay, tell me your business, what you're doing. Okay, you need this, 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 and this. And then if there are any updates, make sure that you're monitoring that, make sure that it doesn't take down your firewall and security settings. So once again, proactive and then double check.
Absolutely. So, Jeremiah, this has been awesome. A lot of great insight again. Really appreciate it. Last question I got for you here, and I'm always curious, especially when I talk to ethical hackers or folks who are on the good side but dealing with a lot of the bad stuff out there. Why should we feel good at night? What should help us when we put our heads down at night to feel confident that everything's going to be okay? What can help us sleep at night, I guess, with what you're seeing out there right now?
It's going to be a long, dark night. No, I don't know. I think we can only do the best we can do. There are so much of our data is out of our own control and our own protection. So it really is kind of like flying blind at this point and just putting faith in the system, putting faith that things will get better. We've heard GDPR and all of these rules and fines were supposed to change everything and make it better, and companies were going to have to pay and they were going to be liable. And it really didn't change anything. I mean, look at the Equifax breach as, the lawyers got paid and people got a handful of nickels. And so I would say do what you can for yourself and your organization and just make sure that as long as you're following the basics, you have a building block to always do better. And education is key, not farming everything out to contractors. As I said earlier, when you educate your internal teams, you keep that knowledge in-house where it can best be used. And that's extremely valuable because you're bettering your people, you're securing your data and your network and really promoting this culture of cybersecurity. And that's the end of my TED Talk.
Excellent. Great stuff, Jeremiah. Again, really appreciate the time. If folks want to reach out to you, what's the best place to look you up?
You can reach me, jfowler@antisafetraining.com. You can follow me on Twitter, even though I don't post very much there since I have, some serious followers. I do post data breaches there when I find them, but yeah, reach out, say hello. Always happy to talk, share knowledge, or put you in the right place.
Excellent. Thanks again, Jeremiah. I really appreciate the time, man.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thanks for the time, Jeremiah, and thanks all of you for joining us today. To catch up on past episodes, you can go to manufacturing.net, IEN.com, or mbtmag.com. You can also check Security Breach out wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple, Amazon, and Overcast. And if you have a cybersecurity story or topic that you'd like to have us explore in Security Breach, you can reach me at jeff@ien.com. For Jeremiah Fowler, I'm Jeff Ranke, and this is Security Breach.